Good morning, YouTube, and welcome back to Kind Heart Homestead. My name is Ben, and I'm up here on our off-grid property in the mountains of Virginia. I'm standing here inside of our 80-foot by 80-foot garden fence, ready to start planting for our spring crops this year. I guess it's pretty premature to say I'm ready. The weather is ready, we think. We hope that there's no more final frosts, but just in case, we're going to start with our spring crops that are slightly frost tolerant, things like radishes, spinach, and maybe some leafy greens. This tarp we've had for a couple years now. This is what we first used as a mulch to kill off the weeds and whatever native vegetation came with our property here. This is the flattest site, but there is kind of a slope coming from the north to the south. And the south is where our bee boxes are. They've been established for about a year now, and we're pretty comfortable working a bit closer to them. So I think this year we're going to start by rolling the tarp back from that side. And we're doing that based on Angie's suggestion that since we didn't ever make it to that side last year, that most of the weeds would be killed. Whereas this side, we actually rolled it up and planted in this part last year, so there is more weed growth. And we barely have had this covered for a couple months now. So it's better to leave the weeds covered for as long as possible until we need it. So we're going to start over there, work our way back simply by rolling the silage tarp over itself and then putting the sandbags back on it as weights. So what I want to do today is use these concrete stakes, this neon masonry twine, mallet, knife, tape measure, all the tools necessary to kind of define our rows. And I haven't quite done the math yet, but what I'm going to do first is measure from the fence to the tarp to establish parallel. It's kind of better to make everything square with the fence so things aren't all lopsided and weird later. And I want our rows to be uniform. This is a 54 by 40 foot tarp. So like I said, I haven't done the math. Once I finish this recording, I'm going to divide it and kind of figure out what the best width for beds and walkways needs to be. And then I'll start measuring that off from where the first stake is and move it to the end. Basically, I have to get all that done because we're starting farthest from this fence line. I suppose I could measure from that fence, but it's kind of overgrown there, and the bee boxes are kind of in the way. I don't want to disrupt their flight path and potentially get stung. So like I did last year, I'm going to work from this way over there, and then the final result will be the first string line way over there in order to roll back the tarp. And then I just rotated our compost from where it was here by our fence way over there to where our first row is going to be. And after I get the string line placed and define the beds, we could potentially use that as a mulch. So we'll see if we can get all that going, and then Angie can start planting her seeds. So let's get started. I hope you stick around. In that time lapse, you saw me measuring consistent lines from the north fence line to basically the northern edge of our production garden plot. That's this area with the silage tarp on it, roughly 54 by 40 feet. This was not square with the fence, but the first thing I did after measuring was square up the tarp and get it weighted back down with the sandbags and whatever else I could find. Only once it was squared was I ready to fold it over itself. And you can see here how straight that line is. This is the most perfect fold we've ever made, and I'm very impressed that I was able to do it by myself, but I did develop a new technique. Right where the fold goes, I have a sandbag weight on each end. That essentially gives me a crease point, and then no matter where I'm pulling the tarp over from, the crease point keeps that tension and makes that seam, that fold, very straight. So now you can see me up close how I'm doing these garden beds. I think we decided on a 30-inch bed, and I'm bordering each side with string so we can establish where the walkways go. We don't want to waste too much time preparing a walkway. Instead, what we do is prepare the beds, and anything we raked out of the bed goes into the walkway and acts as a mulch. You can see here there's a compost pile that I had dumped over near the garden. I just figured it should be closer to the actual garden beds where we would use the compost. This was our winter compost pile, and without being able to rotate it much, it really hasn't broken down. And you can see there's plenty of bits of stuff in there, like whole eggs, whole onions, things like that. The only way for it to really break down is for us to keep it moist and keep it rotated. But we're in a drought in Virginia right now. I think the last I read, there was like 97% of the state in a drought, and we're missing something like 18 inches of water. It's pretty crazy. But I think that's the main reason why the compost isn't breaking down. It's just not wet enough. So we're going to keep watering it and keep rotating it until it becomes usable. And even if it's not 100% broken down, we can still throw it into the walkways and then let the nutrients run out when it gets irrigated into the garden beds. So right now we're using the hula hoe to break out any top growth of weeds, and then we're using the rake to move any of those pulled up roots and stuff either to the compost pile or piled up into the walkway. This hula hoe actually works pretty well, but only on the surface. It also tends to get hung up on rocks, which is why we collect any rocks we see and move them to the edge of the garden. You can see a pile in the bottom left of the screen where Angie was working, and that's just one example of the many rock piles we have in the garden. So we got our string line set for the first 50-foot bed, and we figured out what to do with the sliver. That's this triangular wedge shape because the tarp wasn't square with the fence. I kind of wanted it to be square. So what we're going to do is put our fastest growing crops, which are radishes and spinach, and maybe we'll find something else to put there first. And so then once we harvest it, we'll be able to use that sliver again for maybe a more sprawling crop like a gourd or a squash or something. And then that can let it grow out into the grass without taking over the walkway. That's one thing we struggled with in the past is losing our walkways. So I'm going to start there now. Radishes are typically like 1 to 2 inch spacing. So I'm going to use a little pitchfork as a guide to make some holes. So let's get started. So I'm going to explain how I do this fork technique while you get to watch me doing it. You saw me run the pitchfork parallel to the board first, and that gave me a good spacing row to row. And then I went back and turned that fork 90 degrees, aligned it with that first row of holes that I did, and then I just kept going. Occasionally you're going to find seed packets that have a slightly larger spacing than your fork, and that's perfectly fine. Go ahead and score all the holes just like you see me doing here in a grid, but then slide your hand over some of those holes and delete them. I'm going to do an example of that right now. So watch where I just kind of cleaned off the dirt. I'm scoring the holes, and then you'll see me bend down, delete half of the holes. I'm deleting every other row because the crop spacing is slightly larger
than the previous ones that I was doing. And we like to throw these rocks down as a just a visual cue so we remember where we stopped one crop and where we started the next. And then I basically go down and cover all of the seeds just with some powdery topsoil before I irrigate, just so the seeds don't bounce back out of the holes. So this is the western edge of the first full 50-foot bed that we have. You can see that there's a bit of a discrepancy in the string lines. That's because of that weird wedge due to the crooked nature of the tarp. But now that we're doing everything straight and parallel with the fence, we can start with the full 50-foot rows. Angie's using a hoe to make some pretty good-sized divots. I guess that's more of a golf term. We're talking about holes here. She's going to plant onions in these spaces, so you need a much larger hole than you saw me doing for the spinach and radish seeds. We actually have bulbs to plant for the onions, and you can actually see them there once they're down in the hole. We're not really going for any particular grid pattern. As long as we can fit in between the two strings, that's all we need. And then Angie is doing a similar technique that I did to cover the holes. She's just moving the powdery topsoil over top. And you can see roughly halfway down that row, there's a few rocks that's delineating the edge of the onion bed. And what Angie's getting here from the wagon is manure from our neighbor's livestock. They were nice enough to let us tap into their pile. So we got one wagon full, and because it's fresh and not too broken down, and we don't have time to compost it properly, we're just throwing it in the walkways like I mentioned before, where hopefully some of the nutrients will be able to wash out onto the crops without burning them. And burning is usually the risk that you have adding fresh manure. Cedar's here making a cameo as we continue on this first 50-foot row. Angie's continuing with onions. I believe these are kind of a variety pack of different colors, like red, yellow, and white, but a bit of a different technique here. Instead of seemingly random holes dug by the corner of the hoe, Angie made 2 parallel trenches. And that way it's easier to eyeball the spacing, and it's also easier to cover the bulbs once they're in the proper spot. So Angie's just kind of going through, trying her best to wrangle Cedar and get him to evenly space them, and he's using his shovel a bit to help bury the onions. It's my turn again for the seeds, so I'm working on that same 50-foot row that Angie's onions are in, but I'm planting beets, and I'm using a concrete formboard stake to score my holes. And that's because the spacing dictated on the bag of seeds, it just said, I think it was like 4 to 6 inches or something, and that's way beyond the tines of our fork. It would have just been a waste of time to do that many. So I just kind of eyeballed it, and it's going to be fine. Then we started prepping the next bed, which is just to the north of this one. These are all going to be slightly over 50 feet, but we ran out of the masonry twine. So Angie is helping me move the string line from this bed to the next one, at least until we can get some more string on hand. And then we can permanently keep all of the strings up to denote the walkways. So onto the second full 50-foot bed. Now that it's delineated with string, it's weeded and raked, it's time to use the fork tine method again, because we're planting another tightly spaced seed, which is carrot seeds. I'm not very good at estimating how many holes that I need, so I am constantly doing squats. I'm standing up, kneeling down, standing up, crouching down again until I run out of the seeds, or at least use as many of the seeds as I'm planning to use. In the case of that little wedge over by the compost pile to the left, because spinach and radishes grow so fast, I didn't use all of those seeds. I wanted to save half of the pack for maybe a month later so we can have more radishes and spinach throughout the summer at the farmer's market. But we've historically had bad luck with carrots, and I decided to just plant all of them. You're going to see us using the hose to manually water our seeds and other plants a lot in this video, at least until we get the irrigation system hooked up. And even then, We still have to manually water stuff that's beyond the range of our irrigation. We haven't decided how to address those outliers yet. We either need to run a drip line system across the grass, which could pose a trip hazard, especially for our toddler, or we can run PVC pipes underground and pop them up around each bed area. Right now, Angie's planting some climbing beans for our hoop trellis system in the raised beds. And speaking of that irrigation problem, this is our hugelkultur bed. We just call it the hugel bed for short. Over a year ago, we buried a bunch of old decomposing logs and we planted a bunch of fruit on top of it. So there's strawberries, elderberries, and some other miscellaneous things up here to attract pollinators. So Angie's watering manually. It would be nice to have maybe some sort of drip or emitter system around this so we don't have to water it with the hose so much, because dragging the hose all the way across tends to mess things up. We can knock over pots, we can mess up the tarp, and now that we have fruit trees and some guilds that Angie's working on that surround the fruit trees, we really need to be mindful of where that hose is laying. So speaking of guilds, that is a permaculture concept where you're essentially taking up all the different elevations that you would find in nature, but you're doing it intentionally. I'm not a permaculture expert by any means, but I'm assuming you can use complementary plants or plants that help deter pests, sort of like a companion crop situation. So let's get back to the production garden. Every time we deal with the garden, we need to roll up the tarp just a little bit more. And we don't do it all at once because we want to keep killing weeds as long as possible. But every time we fold the tarp, we do 1 unit at a time. And 1 unit is the width of a bed plus the width of a walkway. That way we can keep everything consistent and we can reveal the same amount of land every time. Once we get the string lines up and I know where the walkway is, I'm putting our irrigation system right on the edge of a string line so it won't interfere with the plants or with people walking. And here's the big reveal. Cedar's here just in time to see the sprinklers, and he loves this. Our irrigation system consists of 1/2 inch poly line as a supply line. It's plugged on the west end, and on the east end there's a threaded hose fitting so we can hook it up to our garden hose. There's also a 90-degree shutoff valve so we can turn the water off to the irrigation without turning off the water main in the garden. Right in the middle there, there's adapters that convert it to PVC, and there's a PVC T-fitting upside down that brings it to our riser. And all of this is homemade. These are 1/2 inch PVC risers, and they're actually threaded right in the middle because I had to extend them extra height one year because our okra was too tall. It's a story for another day, but basically the okra was blocking the water, and I had to raise the irrigation. I just left them tall because we noticed that extra height leads to extra width, so we actually get more irrigation coverage like this. And at the very top of our riser plus the extension of the riser is something that they call a wobbler. These are plastic round fittings. They're roughly cylindrical with some weird shapes in there. You can look them up online if you'd like. They spin around and evenly distribute the water 360 degrees all around the garden, and we need 2 of them because of the range limitations. There's also different plugs you can put in the top that kind of change how far they shoot, and I think we have the biggest ones for our size. So anyway, back to the soil processing here. This is soil that's never been grown on before, so there's a lot of rocks and tenacious weeds in there. The hula hoe couldn't get deep enough to get these big roots out, so Angie's going through with her knife and she's actually cutting them out. She's doing something creative here with the fork that I've never seen. Instead of doing the hole method like I do, where I score the holes, bury the seeds, she's actually carving little trenches using the tines as a reference, and then she's just matting down the topsoil with the edge of the hoe. And now that that row is done, it's once again time to fold over the silage tarp, which I believe is the last time for this month that we're going to do it. You can see the closer we get to the north, the more and more growth there is underneath. So there's a bunch of dead plant material. It's yet to be seen how easy it's going to be to remove. Only once we get the hula hoe out there, after we define the row with the string lines, will we really know for sure what we're dealing with. But a lot of times what you just see at the top is deceiving because there could be so many grass roots underneath.
So you're probably wondering, is this the last bed to get prepped in this video? It is, and I'm going to repeat everything one more time just to get the point across. We are using a no-till approach. That means that we need to find other creative means to suppress weeds. So we use plastic mulch. You can also do other methods such as cardboard or whatever you have on hand. I've even seen people use shingles. The downside of all of that other stuff is that when you're using, I guess, the synthetic products, man-made products, things made out of tar, out of plastic, paper, adhesive, you don't know what's in that, what chemicals are going to leach into your food crops. So that's why we stick with just the sheet plastic. Even though it's not the best material, it is waterproof, and we're just hoping it doesn't leach as much as the alternatives. We use a no-till approach because tilling, while it does break up the soil and make things easier to plant, it's also killing the variety of life underground. You have the microbes and the fungus and all the stuff, and science seems to suggest that plants communicate using the mycelium fungus network underground. And we want to be as less disruptive as possible, especially since we are dabbling into permaculture. We're trying to learn how to garden with the land instead of taking control and destroying the land. So anyway, I like to start with a rake when preparing a new bed. It's a good way to separate the organic live material from the organic dead material. And when you're pulling weeds, it's better to have that dead stuff out of the way. You can always bring it back as a mulch later. Angie's friend was nice enough to come over and help us prep one of these beds. Her and Angie actually just planted all of the strawberries in that raised bed in the bottom left of the screen there. So that's going to act as a mulch as well, because strawberries tend to grow outward. So as they produce more leaves and have more of those runners expanding each plant, it's going to cover the bed and hopefully suppress some of the weeds. And we staggered them appropriately. We waited till after the bean plants had sprouted. Those will climb vertically, and they will not be outcompeted by the strawberries. And the beans are also nitrogen fixers, which will fertilize the strawberries and hopefully allow other stuff to grow there in future years. We'll just have to wait and see how that goes. So I did a pass with an actual hoe this time. I think I actually did 3 lines of the hoe going down this last bed. And my goal was to get as deep as possible, similar depth to what a tiller might do, but I'm just kind of gouging out some of these big roots so Angie and her friend can go back and pull the weeds easier. You can see now we're on the north side of the irrigation, and the intent of the placement of the irrigation was to get it as close to the center of this tarped area as possible so that we can irrigate both halves at the same time. So, speaking now as future Ben editing this video, doing a voiceover, we haven't yet rolled the tarp off of the garden yet. We still have a few beds worth, and it's exactly how it is here in the video. We need to move that aside and prep the rest of the beds because now that it's after Mother's Day, everyone says it's safe enough to plant our crops that are sensitive to the cold, which would be the nightshades mainly. So tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, things like that. We hope to get a lot of that planted soon so we can have a crop this fall or maybe later this summer for the farmer's market. You can see the wagon being pulled around now with the mower. We have another load of manure ready to dump. So we're actually going to bring that through the back gate, which is big enough for a vehicle. And the plan is to dump it at the western edge of one of those newer beds that we prepped because there's not any seeds in that yet.
So we're going to dump it down so Angie can spread it wherever she wants, and it's going to be as close as possible without blocking anything.
All right, everyone, I'm doing my best to catch up on my video editing. The last few I had done in bulk months ago, and I simply have not had time. Way too many commitments, but we're getting things done a little bit at a time, which I feel like is the best homesteading way. Incremental progress. Don't take on too much. Don't get overwhelmed. Just live in the moment. Make sure you get things done. Make sure you can get food for your families. Anyway, I'm out here in the garden now. I just want to show you what's going on. Look at all of this progress. The little wedge-shaped garden plot over here, we have the radishes growing. Let me get you more of a close-up. You can see the little red things coming up. So we might have those ready for the farmer's market this Friday. We have the onions coming up over there. We have garlic coming up there. We have Jerusalem artichokes. Some of this green stuff is deceiving because I think it might just be weeds, but things are shaping up here in the garden. We're in this drought, so we've been having to run the irrigation multiple times a day. We're starting our first flock of the year for meat. We have a few Cornish crosses. If you have any questions about that, we'll let you know once we dispatch them in about 2 months. We've never done Cornish crosses before. We have more videos about the chicken coop coming up. We're going to try to get back to our house build pretty soon. There's just so much we can look forward to this summer. So we're grateful for you to subscribe to our Kind Heart Homestead YouTube channel. You can find us on Instagram and at the farmers markets here, Stewart, every Friday from 8 to noon. So see you back here next time. Thanks for watching.